And a very interesting speech as well. I was especially delighted to hear the names of some of my illustrious predecessors getting this award. It's a great honor to receive the same award as Philip Pullman, Polly Toynbee, Julian Huxley, Freddie Eyre, and of course with the shade of Bertrand Russell hovering over the whole thing. I first read Why I'm Not a Christian and What I Believe in the school library, where the school library had books you might not expect to be in that sort of school, and I was enormously impressed by Bertrand Russell's works. I think I even have some of his words in my memory by heart, in What I Believe. This passage made a great impression on me to the extent that I've remembered it. I believe that when I die, I shall rot, and nothing of my ego shall survive. I'm not a young man, and I love life, but I would scorn to shiver with terror at the thought of annihilation. I may have got that slightly wrong, but that's approximately what he said. Julian Huxley, another one, like me and like Andrew Copson actually, was a member of Balliol College, Oxford. He arrived too late to be included in the Balliol Rhymes, that broadsheet of rather scurrilous rhymes composed in 1881, published in 1881. These rhymes all had the same principle, that they rhymed on the name of the person, and then they made some detail about him. The most famous is the one of the master, Benjamin Jowett. First come I, my name is Jowett. There's no knowledge, but I know it. I am master of this college. What I don't know isn't knowledge. So you get the idea. You make a rhyme on the person's name. Since Andrew happens to be an old Balliol man, we might try to make one up about him. Behold the genial Andrew Copson. No narrow bandwagon he hops on. By hook or crook, by night or day, he'll make you join the BHA. Anyway, I was browsing through the original 1881 broadsheet, in the correct meaning of the word broadsheet, by the way, of the Balliol Rhymes, and I did find one that actually aroused my curiosity. It was clearly about a Victorian humanist, not so common in those days, and I'll read you the last two lines, the last couplet. Gods are naught, and man is all. Spell him with a capital. And the name of the individual in the first couplet, well, let me now read you the whole thing. Positivists ever talkins such an epic style as Dawkins. Gods are naught and man is all, spell him with a capital. That was Clinton Edward Dawkins, 1859 to 1905, later Sir Clinton, born the same year as The Origin of Species. I share only 1/16 of his genes, but I'm delighted to have independently picked up lots of his memes. I also share his first name, although I never use my Clinton. I'm rather annoyed by it, actually. It gets in the way. I became slightly less hostile to it, well, partly because of Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton, which is a nice association, and also when I discovered this Balliol rhyme. Clearly a Victorian humanist. I would have liked to have met him. I also don't mind the Clinton quite so much when I realize it gives me the same initials as Charles Robert Darwin. Well, as I said, Julian Huxley was a generation too late to get into the Balliol rhymes. Actually, his father got in. This one's about his father, Leonard Huxley, evidently a cheerful fellow. I am Huxley, blonde and merry, fond of jokes and laughter very. If I laughed at what was witty, I should laugh less, which were pity. Julian Huxley was a contemporary of my grandfather at Balliol, actually, and he was a predecessor of mine as tutor in zoology at another Oxford college, my present Oxford College, New College. He was said to be the last tutor in Oxford in the subject, capable of teaching the whole subject, not just his specialist part of it. That kind of breadth of scholarship is traditionally thought to be the private property of classical scholars, such as J.B.S. Haldane, for example, another, I suspect, associate of this society. Is that right? Yes. Who got a first in classics and then switched to biology, became one of the most distinguished biologists of the 20th century. It's probably not true to say that a first in greats can master science in a fortnight, but there is something in the idea. Andrew Copson, too, actually read classics, as it happened, at Balliol, and he shows the same polymathic grasp that we've come to expect of a first in classics. And let no one say, by the way, that a classical education is of no practical value. Let me give you a telling example, which was told by H.F. Ellis, himself a noted classicist. It seems that there was an expedition to South America, to the Andes, and the expedition was well put together, and there was a zoologist and a botanist and a geologist, a geographer, a cartographer, all the right sort of people you'd expect to be on such an expedition. But the leader also chose a classicist, a specialist in Latin literature. And nobody could understand why this was, but the leader said, don't you worry, he'll come in useful. And the expedition set off, and then when they were up in the Andes, unfortunately, a rifle went off by accident and hit the classicist, thereby saving the life of a valuable mule. I do actually take seriously the arguments traditionally offered in favor of a classical education. It clearly was an exaggeration to say that a first in greats could master science in a fortnight. But it is true that a classical education did equip one to branch into other subjects with some facility. And I respect this idea sufficiently to have used it as the title of a thesis in education, which I call Evolution, the New Classics. At present, evolution is taught as part of biology, along with all the other parts of biology, cell biology, biochemistry, comparative anatomy, molecular genetics, and so on. And evolution comes in as one little segment of that. What I want to propose is that evolution should become the central pillar of a much broader education, liberal education, bringing in relevant aspects relevant to evolution, all sorts of natural and human sciences. And I think that such an education would do much of what classics was traditionally supposed to do, and indeed did do. Classics was supposed to tell us about our roots. Well, obviously evolution does that. Classics made us look at familiar things from an unfamiliar angle. You see another world, and it makes you see your own world more clearly from that unfamiliar angle. Classics teaches you, and of course evolution does, teaches you to see things in the long term, sub specie aeternitatis. Classics and evolution trains us in how to put an argument, how to make an argument, a controversial argument, how to handle controversy. And God knows my subject of evolution is no stranger to controversy. Evolution, like classics, puts us in our place. When you look at as a taxonomist, at the tree of life, when you see the tree of cousinship, the family tree of all of life, and you realize that not just humans, not just mammals, not just vertebrates, eukaryotes are just one branch, one smaller branch of the tree of life. We are closer cousins to amoebas than amoebas are to bacteria. We're very close cousins to amoebas compared to bacteria. This puts us in our place. So my new degree course, which I would like to institute in evolution, places evolution at the center of the education and brings in lots and lots of other subjects, such as economics, philosophy, social science, moral philosophy, engineering, computer science, medicine, agriculture, linguistics, physics, cosmology, history of science. I'll take just a few of these. Economics. Economic principles run right through modern evolutionary theory. I haven't time to go into detail, but the economic idea of opportunity cost, the idea that anything has to be paid for, no such thing as a free lunch. You have to pay for whatever you do now in the form of lost opportunities to do other things in the future. A central economic concept. And it underlies our understanding of sexual selection, of the relationship between parents and offspring, sex ratio theory. Its economic thinking is rife in evolutionary theory. Philosophy. Philosophers these days are discovering Darwin in a big way, and I'm sure you've all seen books like Dan Dennett's Darwin's Dangerous Idea. There are lots and lots of philosophy books which draw heavily upon evolution. And social science ought to be doing that, I'm afraid isn't to the same extent. Moral philosophy. What are the evolutionary origins of empathy, of sympathy, of our tendency to feel sorrow when we see distress, our tendency to want to help other people, other sentient beings, indeed. Engineering. The same optimizing principles that engineers have to deal with are absolutely central to evolutionary theory. Both in engineering and in economics, the idea of optimality is central. In engineering and economics, you have to define what you're optimizing. In evolutionary theory, that which is being optimized is given you by the theory itself. It's actually the survival of genes. And that, of course, works itself out in rather complicated ways. But whereas economists have to decide what their utility function is, whether it's the greatest happiness of the greatest number, or the gross national product, or my own personal income, whatever it is, you have to decide that, and then you maximize it. In evolutionary biology, that which is maximized is given by the theory, although it's actually quite complicated to work out. Computer science, well, apart from using computers, of course, modern molecular genetics, which would, of course, play a central role in my degree in evolution, modern molecular genetics has become a branch of information technology. It really is digital information technology, something which Darwin would have rejoiced in that, because it actually helps to solve one of the major riddles that Darwin was faced with in his own time and never did solve in his own time. Medicine. Very, very important. All doctors should be Darwinian. There's a wonderful book which I recommend to you by Randolph Nesse and George Williams. The book is not called Darwinian Medicine, although it ought to be. The book has a different title in America and Britain, as sadly all too many books do have. Publishers seem to think they have a duty when a book crosses the Atlantic to change its title. They have little else to do, so I suppose that's the one thing they've they feel they can do to throw their weight around. I have actually literally bought the same book twice on Amazon because I didn't realize that it was the same book. And I've even seen on Amazon, you know how Amazon gives you a book and they say, if you like this book, you'll probably like this one. Anyway, this book by Nessie and Williams in America is called Why We Get Sick, which is a pretty daft title for a book that you want doctors to buy. What doctor would ever buy a book called Why We Get Sick? They think they know. It has nothing about Darwinism in it. It should have been called Darwinian Medicine. Then when it crossed the Atlantic to Britain, Why We Get Sick means why we throw up. So it had to be changed, and then it sounded like something holistic, something that Prince Charles would enjoy. Something like evolution and healing. But anyway, never mind the title. The book itself is brilliant, and it tells why doctors should be Darwinian. I actually wrote a puff for the book which said, buy 2 copies and give 1 to your doctor. There are various obvious things. Everybody knows that if only doctors had been wise to natural selection, we wouldn't have the problems we now do have over antibiotic resistance evolving by natural selection in bacteria. But there are other things like, for example, when you get a temperature, when you get a fever, is this something that a doctor ought to bring down? Should a doctor be giving you drugs to lower your temperature? Or is it just a symptom? Is in fact the temperature perhaps a Darwinian adaptation by the body to make life difficult for the pathogen? In which case giving somebody a drug to bring the temperature down is the very last thing you should be doing. Nessie and Williams are not saying that is the case. What they are saying is that we need to think in a Darwinian way. Then when you think about the ailments, people get lower back pain so often. It's so likely that this is because we are ancestrally quadrupedal animals who've turned into bipedal animals, and this is giving us problems. Agriculture, obviously artificial selection, the artificial version of natural selection. If you're wanting to do an experimental test of natural selection, what could you possibly do other than artificially select? And of course artificial selection is what has given us all the highly productive breeds of domestic animals and plants. Artificial selection will be supplemented in the future by genetic engineering, which is the manipulation of the mutation side of the Darwinian equation, not just the selection side. Cosmology, well, this is a more distant relationship, but cosmologists often talk about the evolution of the universe. They're wrong to do so. It's development. The analogy is with embryology, not with evolution. But there is a connection in that, almost a theological connection, in that both evolution and cosmology are in the business of explaining origins, of explaining where we come from, in the case of biology, where life comes from, in the case of cosmology, where the universe comes from. And I would think that my course in evolution would include the cosmological theories of the origins of everything. History of ideas, well, evolution is a particularly interesting field in the history of science, because, of course, as you know, Darwin was by no means the first person to suggest the idea of evolution. That goes back to ancient Greece. He wasn't quite even the first person to suggest natural selection, and it's arguable whether Patrick Matthew, for example, Patrick Matthew probably did have natural selection before Darwin. He wrote it in the appendix to a rather obscure book on naval timber, and not surprisingly, it wasn't widely taken up. Patrick Matthew complained to Darwin about being overlooked, and Darwin punctiliously did acknowledge him in the preface to later editions of The Origin of Species. I actually don't quite buy the idea that Patrick Matthew had the full idea. He clearly had the idea of natural selection as a negative force, a weeding out, a removing of inferior types. But I'm not sure that he really got the idea of natural selection as a positive force, building up the complexity of life, the beauty of life, the elegance of life, and the illusion of design in life. Wallace did get it. Wallace got it independently of Darwin. Anyway, this is an interesting topic in history of ideas. But I suppose most importantly, evolution is the subject which answers the question that every child would like to answer. Where do I come from? Why do I exist? What's it all about? What are we here for? What's the meaning of life? All these things which have been the traditional domain of theology, which has given wrong answers throughout the centuries. The right answers can now come from science, and especially from evolutionary science. So that's my pitch, my educationist pitch for evolution as the new classics. And to finish off, I want to return to Julian Huxley, who wrote a poem that I first read when I was an undergraduate myself at the same college. And I've remembered this poem ever since. It made an impression on me at the time, and I think it says something about the humanist attitude to the universe. The world of things entered your infant mind to populate that crystal cabinet. Within its walls the strangest partners met, and things turned thoughts did propagate their kind. For once within, corporeal fact could find a spirit. Fact and you in mutual debt built there your little microcosm, which yet had hugest tasks to its small self assigned. Dead men can live there and converse with stars. Equator speaks with pole and night with day. Spirit dissolves the world's material bars. A million isolations burn away. The universe can live and work and plan, at last made God within the mind of man. Thank you very much for the honor you've done me.